So, hello then, welcome back to yet another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spike Knight, and in these podcasts I like talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing Late Night with the Devil. But just before I do that, I should say what I say at the start of every podcast I do, which is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers, but prefer to listen to your podcast on Spotify, well, even look, as you can also listen to this podcast on Spotify at Night of the Movies on that platform. And if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check out this podcast visually. Yes, you can watch this podcast on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course. And please leave me with some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there are always things to improve on, and feedback is, as ever, much appreciated. Also, I'm going to let people know that I went swimming early today, and I've spoken about this on previous podcasts and podcasts that I've done over the past couple of days. When I go swimming, I get this thing I like to call fuzzy thinking, and that basically means that I might not make sense completely. I might not be completely coherent in this podcast today, in my review of this film. So I do apologise about that. I do apologise if I say a sentence that doesn't totally make sense and I don't go back to correct myself. It's just because I got fuzzy thinking right now after going swimming earlier today. But I'm going to push through this podcast because I want to talk about this film. And this film is Late Night with the Devil. So this is a new horror movie that is directed by Cameron Carnes and Colin Carnes. Apologies if I mispronounced those names. And it stars David Dastmalchian. And if you don't know that actor's name by name, he has been in a lot of movies. The sort of actor you probably recognise, I mean, you probably got a picture of him right there, is a sort of actor you'd probably recognise if you saw him in a movie. He's had bit roles, small roles in films like The Dark Knight, Oppenheimer, he's in the Ant-Man films, he was also in Denny's for the new films like Dune Part 1, Prisoners, Blade Runner 2049, and his biggest role to date before this, because he's the protagonist of this film, but the biggest role he had before this was as Polka Dot Man in James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. And I wanted to see this film because he was leading it, and I wanted to see what he was like as a lead, because like I said before, the biggest role I've seen him do before was in The Suicide Squad. He was good in that film, but he didn't have a huge role. He wasn't the main character. Well, he's the main character of this film, and I wanted to see what it was like as a main character. Plus, the premise for this film sounded great. A horror movie on a talk show from the 1970s with the potential of some evil being exposed on this talk show. The premise sounded brilliant. So, yesterday I went out of my way to go and watch it at a cinema that I don't usually go to, and here are my thoughts on it. I really liked this film. I really liked Late Night with the Devil because it was not really what I expected it to be, and I liked that about it. It felt very authentic. I mean, not only did it feel like a film from the 1970s, literally telling the story of a talk show in the 1970s, it feels like it's very much of that time period, but also all the kind of silly stuff that you see happen in this film. Like at one stage you see this demonic possession thing happen. All the silly stuff and all the unbelievable stuff in the film actually feels authentic when you're watching it, and it kept me hooked throughout its 90-minute runtime. And the majority of the film takes place in one location, and it does a very good job at sustaining the audience's attention, the viewers, the spectators' attention, and keeping you engaged in what's going on. The whole film kind of feels like that scene with the Joker on the talk show in the Joker movie, which came out in 2019. He's on the talk show and he shoots Robert De Niro's character. The whole film sort of feels like that. It sort of feels like that one scene in Joker, but throughout its 90-minute runtime, because just as you think the film can't get any crazier or twisted, it does something else and it gets even more twisted. And it's a very well written film. It's very well paced. very well paced. I didn't get bored in any moment, and it has some comedic moments in it too, which I really liked. Moments of comic relief where something quite shocking would happen. You'd be quite surprised by what's happening on the screen, and then it cut to something that made me laugh. I'm not sure it was intentional, but I suppose that's dark comedy for you. Yeah, it's got some dark comedic relief, which I really liked. And David Dastmalchian, I might be mispronouncing his name, and apologies if I am, but David Dastmalchian is superb in this film. He is phenomenal. I completely bought into him as this talk show host. Completely bought into him. I can't wait to see him do more bigger roles in future films, because I've seen him do small roles before in past movies that I already mentioned earlier on in this review. Like, I remember his small role in the Denis Villeneuve film Prisoners, which is a very dark film, by the way, but I saw him do a small role in that, and I was like, wow, I want to see more of him, and he's barely in that film, at least from what I remember. But he's on screen literally in every single frame of this film, and he's so good. He's so good in this movie. Again, completely bought into him as a talk show host. And there's this thing about him which not many actors have. I can only think of, like, Daniel Kaluuya has this as well, where his facial expressions, you're constantly drawn to them. You're constantly drawn to his facial expressions throughout the film, his mannerisms, and just the way he plays his character. You feel that throughout the entirety of the film, he's got something up his sleeve, but you're not really sure what. You feel like he's up to something, and you're not really sure what. I'm not going to give away if he is up to something, but the way he plays his character, you're not really sure whether you should like him or not. That's sort of the way I feel about many talk show hosts, actually. You're not really sure whether you should like him or not. And again, plays him perfectly. And I love the opening of the film too. The film opens with this prologue, and it's got this sort of 1970s narration going on throughout this prologue, where it basically tells you everything about David Dastmalchian's character, about this talk show host, and about the talk show that they host, and the opening does a great job at filling you in and telling you everything you need to know, and everything that might be important later on in the film. And the funny thing was, whilst that was all going on, I was like, right, I'm loving this opening. And just as the opening was coming to an end, and we were actually going to get into the talk show where, Late Night with the Devil, with that whole section of the film, just as that was coming in, somebody walks into the cinema. I was like, you probably missed all the important details. And what they had, and I was like, I don't know if you're going to get quite as much out of this film as I think I'm going to. And I got a lot out of it because of that opening, which sets the scene perfectly and fills you in on everything you need to know. Quick 5-minute opening with some narration, and yeah, it got me hooked into the film. I was immersed in it, I was engaged in it, and I loved it. I loved its twisted originality, its twisted creativity, and I could not believe how much I was hooked into this film. Like, towards the finale of this movie, I'm not sure if the finale totally works, by the way. That'd be my only criticism. My only criticism with the film is the last 5 minutes I didn't totally understand. I don't think that completely works. But other than that, I was getting close to the end of the film, and I was like, I had to sort of pinch myself a couple of times, because I was like, oh my god, I can't believe how much I am glued to the screen. I can't look away from what's going on, because there are some freaky things that happen, some twisted things, and it's a really great horror movie. And you know why it's a great horror movie? Because, it does have some jump scares here and there, but it isn't just reliant on jump scares. I don't really like horror movies that rely on jump scares, because jump scares, in my opinion, are cheap. They elicit emotion for 30 seconds to a minute, and then the emotion is over with. Whilst the best horror movies, at least for me, make you feel unnerved throughout their runtime, are creepy, and get under your skin. And this film does. And also, the best horror movies are about something. They're not just about somebody being scared in a house. They're actually about something else. And this one was about the lengths people go to for fame and fortune. And I loved how it was about that. I loved how it had these underlying themes, and it kept going back to that, because every time the film cuts to a break, because when the film is shot like you're watching the talk show take place in the 1970s. Every time the talk show cuts to break, it cuts to the characters behind the scenes in all these black and white shots, and you see David Dastmalchian's character, this talk show host, talking to his manager about how successful this episode of the talk show is being. And it keeps that theme going throughout the film whilst making you feel unnerved, whilst getting under your skin and providing you with a wildly entertaining watch. I loved this film. I loved it. I wasn't sure if I loved it at the start of this podcast, hence why I said I really liked the film. I think earlier on this podcast, I wasn't sure if I loved the film when I started recording this podcast today. But the more I talk about it, the more I think about it, God, I think it's a great movie, and I can see it becoming a cult classic in the next 10 years. I mean, to be honest, I would say it deserves more than a cult status, but I don't think it will get that because it's not had a wide release. Although, if you're a fan of horror movies and this is showing at your local cinema, check it out, because I think seeing it in a cinema, is going to add to your experience than seeing it on a streaming service. It's truly, it's something unique. It's not at all what I expected, and I loved it. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that Late Night with the Devil, yeah, you know what, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Apart from my one criticism that I'm not sure if the ending totally worked. Maybe if I rewatch it, I would like it more. But apart from that one criticism, the rest of the film I thought was superb. One thing I haven't actually mentioned yet, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but you have all these unbelievable things and these silly things happening from like demonic possession, and these person early on in the film who's communicating with people in the afterlife. These things which even things that I don't totally believe. I don't think people can communicate with the dead. I just think there's a lot of rubbish. And what this film does well is it has this character there who is providing a quote-unquote rational explanation for all of these weird and strange and creepy things happening throughout the film. So it has somebody who kind of acts like that audience member who wouldn't buy into what's happening, but then at the same time, the film still makes you believe in what's happening. It's a very cleverly written film in that way, because it answers all the questions that the audience member might be asking if they don't totally believe in what's happening. But at the same time, though, it still makes you believe in all that. I love the period setting. This film feels like a film from the 1970s. It feels like you're watching a film about this talk show from the 1970s. It feels like you're watching a film about this talk show in the 1970s, and I love that about it. It made it that much more entertaining, and I thought it was a really, really great film. I loved it. And I'm not a big horror fan. I'm not a big horror fan at all. But I thought this film was very good, with its twisted originality, twisted creativity, how it sustained my engagement throughout its 90-minute runtime. It's around 90 minutes, the runtime of this film. But at the same time, it's staying all in one room. It's a bottle film, if you want to call it that. A film which takes place mostly in one setting. It sustained my engagement, and it provided me with a wildly entertaining time that I was completely hooked and completely engaged in. And so, all in all, as I've already said, and as I'm going to say once more in this podcast today, I'm going to say that Late Night with the Devil is a 9 out of 10 from me. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen Late Night with the Devil, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. Maybe you loved the film, or maybe it wasn't for you. Whatever your thoughts are on Late Night with the Devil, please let me know in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet and you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe, because it makes me happier, and look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As I already said, thank you as always for watching or listening to this podcast, and I suppose that's it. So I will see you guys again soon, but bye for now. Bye.